Hi there, Mubali here, and I'm here to give you a little bit of tips and techniques for an age old question. I frequently get asked, as well as many producers who ask the same question: how do I get better bassline? Well, there's no one particular way to get better bassline. However, there's a few tips that I picked up along the way that'll help out and help get you closer. So let's talk about 6 tips that'll help you with your bassline. We're going to get started with our first tip, and that is all about note length. The reason why note length is important is whenever you tell something, like let's say these MIDI notes, you just told it to sound, but when you tell it to stop, it still takes time for the note to decay out. And this is definitely more apparent with the release setting that you have on your amplitude envelope for your synth. So normally you'd say, oh, okay, well, let's just turn down the amp release as low as you possibly can. But that still isn't enough. Or what will happen is now it'll decay so quickly that it'll decay while the sound is not at a zero crossing, and you'll have a click. And we don't want clicks. We want the sound to seem like it's naturally decaying out. So either you'd have to go and render it to audio and fade out each individual click, which is tedious and not fun. Or you can think about shortening your notes. I always opt to shorten my notes. Now in Ableton Live, it is very easy to do this because all you have to do is just toss in a MIDI effect called note length. So I will toss it just before Serum, and to help me see what's going on, I've got the assistance of Smart Electronics and their Smexoscope, which is very, 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 very handy. It allows you to see the waveform, but not like an oscilloscope, but actually see the waveform. And that'll give you a better idea of what's going on. Now let's take a look real quick. Okay, now when we take a look at this, we can see that although there are supposed to be 3 notes playing, it doesn't look like it. So that means the notes are all running in together. They're running into each other, and they're running together, and they're just making a blob. So first thing you should do is to shorten those notes. Okay, you see here, here, and here? Those are distinct endpoints for the waveform. So that means that they're not running into each other anymore. And that's the first tip. Shorten your note length. Next tip, it's very important that the phase on your synth re-triggers at a consistent phase. That means they can't be bouncing all over the place, which makes it really difficult to use hardware synths for bass lines. Usually you have to just record a passage and then find a really good cycle for what you want to use and just sample it, or just record a section and loop that. But it can be really tricky. There are some producers that just don't really care about that, and to each their own. It's not my role to say whether or not each technique is good or bad. It just depends on whether or not the technique is effective for you or not. If this is effective for you, feel free to use it. If this is not effective for you, please feel free to discard it. It's quite all right. So now what I've done with Serum is I have reduced the random phase to 0. So it's always going to re-trigger from the same spot. And I'm just going to adjust the phase just a hair, and now it should sound consistent. The next two tips that I'm going to provide, they actually work in conjunction. I suggest that you have snappy envelope settings and snappy envelopes, but also reasonable filter cutoff settings and reasonable modulation settings. The reason why these go hand in hand is because even if you have a very snappy envelope, if you have your settings off on the filter it's controlling, it's not going to get what you want for psychedelic trance bass. So, first off, to get the snappy envelope, we're going to turn off the sustain for now. You can have some sustain in there if you really want to, and I will probably suggest a situation where that might be incredibly handy. And then when you're setting your decay, it's important to have an idea of roughly how much time your decay really needs. At one point in time, I used to set my decay to be exactly the length of a 16th note, but I found that to be great for percussive sounding bass, but I was robbing myself of tone. And I felt that by setting it maybe a bit longer, even like to an 8th note length or something along those lines, that allowed the fullness of the note to get through while it still got out of the way and remained plucky, which are two important things that you need. So let's go ahead and I'm going to set this somewhere around here for now, and we will see what we need when we get to where we're testing it out. For now, we'll just adjust that by ear. Now the next part of this is having reasonable envelope settings. So what I like to do is we're just going to go with the 24 decibel filter, the Moog style, because I kind of like how it sounds in general. So when I'm setting my initial filter cutoff, I like to sweep it down to where I can hear just maybe the lower fundamental or the first couple of octaves of the bass, where like you can still feel it and it's kind of hearable but not super hearable. I'll show you what I mean. See that? Too low. That seems about right. Now we'll assign this, and it initially gives it all the way up, and we're going to listen and hear how that's probably not ideal. It makes it feel a little too attacky, I think. I don't know. Let's see. Let's back off a little bit on the settings to something reasonable and see what happens. Okay, so that is the combination of having snappy envelopes, because the if you use an exponential envelope on the decay side, it'll curve back in to make more of a logarithm. So that means that it's gonna quickly start at the top and then kind of curve in real quick. So that's what creates that snap. And it never quite gets all the way to zero. It just gradually curves. And that provides this nice little movement that a plucked instrument would generally have. So that's very helpful. And then having reasonable low pass filter settings. You know, you don't want to start with your cutoff too low to where it's super percussive and you're not getting the fullness of the lower mid-range and the upper mid-range of the note coming through. And you don't want to set it to be too snappy where it's got too much bite, where you're hearing like some of the too much of the transient information in the bass. Because some transient information is important, so it can give it presence and help it like really establish its percussive nature. However, too much, it's going to fight with other things in the mix. So you want to just keep it reasonable. The next little bit of information that has been helpful to me is a little bit of post-filter overdrive. This can work wonders on making a bass feel a little bit fatter. But it's important not to overdo it, because you can definitely overdo it and end up being really subby and muddy. So, season to taste. We're chefs here. We're not just dumping flavor powder in here like we're making ramen. We're cooking a dish. And it's delicate. So, little bits of things go a long way. So let's add in a little bit of drive and see what happens. We'll start with none and then slowly add some in. So, as you can see, a little bit of overdrive just after the filter goes a long way. What ends up happening is it's going to boost it's basically boosting all the frequencies. So, the low pass filter is accentuating the lower frequencies when it's doing its filter sweep. So all that low energy is also coming through unfiltered and also slightly distorted, slightly overdriven. And overdrive is more noticeable in the upper harmonics of the signal. However, since we're doing like the low pass filtering beforehand, it's going to bring out some of those upper harmonics, but not nearly as much as if we were to apply it before the filtering, for instance. So it's an overall pretty nice touch. So that is tip number 5, I believe. And the last tip goes into some processing. Up until now, this has all been from the sound design level concepts. But when it comes to like processing your bass, if you are going to use EQ, and sometimes you do need to do that, I thoroughly recommend using gentle cuts. Or, if you are going to boost, just don't be ridiculous about it. And if you are going to cut, be gentle and conservative about your cuts. Don't throw like 8 notches in there. Or, don't feel like you got to pull out a frequency minus 80 decibels or something like that to completely remove it. All you need to do when you're EQing a bass line, or any instrument for that matter, is restoring or introducing a little bit of overall balance to the overall sound. If at all possible, you shouldn't have to EQ out more than a few decibels to just overall shape the sound, because you just want a little bit less of something so you can hear more of everything else. So one of the things that I really enjoy using, not only beyond just doing gentle cuts, but I also have something that I use that is a very musical sounding EQ, but it's also got a nifty trick to it. And this is the Surfer EQ from Sound Radix. Now what I'm going to do is group this, and then we're going to take an external instrument and route that MIDI to the surfer EQ. So the surfer EQ is now going to be able to read the MIDI note and move accordingly. If I wanted to, say, get really weird and throw in some random bass, a random note movement in the pitch, it'll follow it. So what I tend to like to do is I'll just pull out just a little bit of certain frequency. So there you have it. Gentle, musical EQ cuts. So you're just balancing out the sound just a bit. You're not doing anything too drastic. So there you are. Those are 6 tips to help you make better bass lines. And I'm Ubali. I hope this is helpful. Till next time. Peace.